It's funny that there might be a disagreement on this panel. That might be an overvalue.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
So, you know what's funny? I don't think we've ever done anything like this. I don't think we've actually ever been on camera at the same time, all at once.
No.
But I think it's a cool opportunity. We're gonna try to do more things like this. I think it's an honor to be working with so many passionate people here at Curated. I've known Herschel now for
Almost 20 years.
20 years. I've known Steven for probably 10 years,
10
something,
years, so,
something
yeah.
like that. And I respect these guys so much, just in terms of their knowledge and their passion and sort of, you know, in the process of what we do. And I you know, we get so many questions on Instagram from clients, collectors around the world about the current car market or what we think is undervalued or where we see the future. And I think it's a perfect time to start a series like this because the car market has been completely insane. You know, when you think about this last year, you look at new cars, and new cars have done horribly. And I think there's, you know, you read a lot of the comments on Bring a Trailer, and there's been a lot of cars that have been reserved not met. You see a lot of cars that haven't done so well. And then this past week, I would say literally, it feels like the last 30 days, maybe 60 days, we've had some incredible results. And I think we jump into that maybe first. We've had some incredible results, including the red Miura SV sold by RM Sotheby's. So I have to ask you guys first off, what's your opinion about the? I'm gonna chime in after. I'm very passionate about this one. What's your opinion about the sale of the Miura SV?
So look, I think to your point, the market's become more honest, right? I think we went through 3 or 4 years of a market that was fueled by kind of some fake economic markers. There was a little bit of money pushed into the market, and there was cheap money to borrow. So overall, it began to artificially push a lot of values up, which is, I think the honesty is coming back into the market, which leads me to the Miura. I think we've always felt the Miura is the flagship, right, for Lamborghini. Their first supercar. It should be the leader as far as value and investability. So I think what we saw is an expectation and not an anomaly. I think the foundation's now been set. So I feel like the car is where it needs to be. Yeah, and
Cool.
where it's supposed to be.
Cool. And from the younger generation, what do you think, Steven?
It's the greatest example of a supercar. It transcends the generation, which is, I think, the biggest thing, where it's a usable car, you can get in it. Even if somebody that's not super versed in dealing with old cars, they can get in a Miura and be acclimated because it's still new enough to kind of not have like the weird starting procedures or something like that. So you can use it, but it transcends the generation in style. It's fast. It still feels relevant today. And the SVs are the greatest examples of what feels kind of relevant.
Cool. I agree. I know we're not going to agree about everything.
So there's a lot of different perspectives here. So yeah, that was a good way to start it out, right?
I agree. I've said this, and I think that is, you know, Lamborghini's 250 GTO.
Yeah.
I think a Miura SV is the ultimate. It's the first supercar, and then when you think of the first supercar as the Miura, the SV is the ultimate version. It's the rarest. And to me, and I always say this to people, and people sometimes have said I'm crazy, but you can still park an SV next to an F40, and it looks tough. It's wide, it's low, the wheels are wider. Whereas, you know, the earlier cars, and I have a huge appreciation for a P400 or an S, it still looks almost like a 60s car, where this really looks like.
Well, I think any time there's been any sort of poll taken on what the most beautiful cars in the world, the Miura is always on the list, right? And that, as you said, transcends generations. So yeah, to your point, park it anywhere and it's still going to stand out.
Yes. So we are huge fans, Miura SV. And I want to bring up one other thing when it comes to the Miura. One of my arguments a long time ago with a collector, and I'd love both your opinions on this. This is slightly controversial, is that historically, you look at these Ferraris that sell for $7, $8, $9, $10 million, $30 million, $50 million, and a Ferrari historian told me, well, they have racing pedigree and racing history, and that's why you won't see a Miura SV at $10 million one day or $20 million. And I actually said to him, I said, I don't know if the next generation of collectors cares as much. And I think that some of the accolades of Lamborghini, like celebrity owners and pop culture and movies and all these different things, are maybe more important to the next generation. So I would love your guys' opinions.
Yeah,
on that.
I think what we're seeing is Lamborghini as a brand. We've noticed in the last couple of years that they're now investing more in their history, and they're bringing in the customer experience into their history a little bit more. So I think the lag that we've seen is based on the fact that Lamborghini, I think, has not until recently invested as much in the historical cars and the customer experience. I think one thing you have to really give Ferrari credit for is they found a way to engage the client at almost every aspect of ownership. So they're engaging, clients with the historical cars and doing rallies for them, and finding ways to monetize the investability of the cars and finance them. And I think seeing Lamborghini do that is probably why we're beginning to see the focus of a guy that has a huge Ferrari collection now shift over to the Lamborghini. Go, wait a minute, that's a really important car. To your point,
Yes.
That's the GTO of Lamborghini. We need to buy them. And by the way, there's not a lot of them. And there's even less of them that are investable because some of them aren't in great shape or matching numbers. So I think what we're seeing now is the initial on-ramp of the factory engaging the client.
Completely agree with that, but I think it's the usability and support that these cars have had is the biggest thing. There's a famous example of a collector in Europe who actually did a road trip in a rally and was almost daily driving a Miura SV a few years ago, and took it on and drove it from England to somewhere in Europe, and that speaks volumes that someone had the confidence to get it in and drive it and use it. And that's what we're seeing is people that want experiences with the cars, things to do with them, and have the confidence and the support to do it.
Love it. I'm not an expert on new hypercars and new supercars, but I think we're sitting with an expert on new hypercars and supercars. I think if you read a lot of what's on social media today, people are like, "Oh, the car market, SF90s are crashing," and all these different cars. Oh, they're not doing well. What is your take on the new supercars, some of the new hypercars, and where do you see, I would say, the next, comparative to this stuff, where do you see the next 6 months or 2 years in that world?
I think what we're seeing is a little bit of model saturation and then segment saturation, right? So you have the manufacturers making more models than ever before. And then their quote unquote limited runs are in the thousands. So I think that's beginning to tamper down some of the values, and it's almost too much for people to choose from. Then you look at the technology of manufacturing, and it just seems like a guy with a bank account and an idea could start manufacturing a car. So we started to see this cottage industry turn into almost a mini industry of new cars, of new electric supercars and hypercars, and newer brands coming on market. And we've seen some come and go with pretty much a whisper, and some companies like Koenigsegg that started out, struggled, but they're now an established mark. I think Pagani is in that conversation as well. I see the market is going to get a little bit more finicky. I think from an investability standpoint and from a brand loyalty standpoint, they're going to have to stick to the limited runs. I think they're going to have to be unique models, and as you know, my formula is 500 cars or less, and it's money in the bank. When you start to get into thousands, it's a little bit more difficult. I think there's too many choices, which is starting to kind of like water demand down. So for the next 6 months to a year, I think we might see some shakeout. I think we're going to see a lot of cars enter the market that were kind of required purchases, like Ferrari does with a lot of their clients. Let's buy these 5 cars to get to the big car. And I think with money being a little bit expensive now, it's going to probably turn the market into what feels like a down market. It's just going to be a lot of cars on market that guys just don't want, because they want the 500 limited car or the 200 limited car, but they don't want the one that they had to buy. So I think it's going to feel turbulent, but I'm still really strong on this type of blue chip stuff and really limited run cars.
So my next question for you, Steven, you're the youngest guy here, one of the youngest guys at Curated. What would you say if you had to say there's 3 modern, and let's say post, I'm just gonna throw out like 2012. What would you say at your generation? What do you think attracts you most from a car that is exciting and one day could be a Miura SV or something like that? What excites you most? Top 3 cars.
Price point, or just
Honestly,
top tier?
it just
Okay. Modern stuff. You look at the groundbreaking stuff, like the classic is like the Trinity. You had the P1, the Ferrari, and then you have the 918. So those were the kind of the groundbreaking cars, which is kind of the safe bets. But I would also say the special stuff, because this is the time when you see the manufacturers really getting into the special wishes project. Like look at the premium on the 675 LT with the roof scoop versus the standard car.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the cars that I would pick out where they're really highly optioned, special examples of the limited stuff. When we see the special colors of the 458 Speciale, that's the last of the line where some guys who are not super into carburetors and older cars, they still want that experience of raw, but not the drawbacks of ownership that are kind of encumbered with those other cars that don't get into the hybrid systems. So you can still get that and serviceability and support, but have that special, unique features. And we're seeing premiums for uniquely spec cars. So that's kind of what
I agree completely.
We're agreeing a lot here, guys. Where's the controversy?
We're gonna argue about a few things.
Yeah,
I
we
promise.
need to.
I promise.
The other thing I will say is like the to your point of the cars that are coming onto the market, that might be an interesting time to have guys who are just kind of getting their feet wet to jump into cars that they might not be able to afford. Maybe a lot more so, because look at the production numbers of 430s versus kind of new Californias and stuff. So it's a great opportunity to jump into stuff and get your feet wet in the hobby and experience ownership.
Very cool.
It allows people to experience the market, where some guys that are transitioning out allows people to jump in.
Yep. So let's bring up. This is a very familiar topic, but I'd love everyone's opinion on this. The Murcielago, the manual Murcielago, that's sold on Bring a Trailer. We've had there we go. We've had a few of these, and I think this car has definitely grown it into its own. I think when we first started buying them, I think our first video, one of our first videos, actually Steven remembers it because he always brings it up in conversation.
He was 4 years old.
Yeah. But this was probably 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was driving a black manual Mercy, and I said,
Carwood
wow,
trip.
yes.
Yeah.
And I said, under $500,000, I don't think there's a better car in the world. And I still listen. Look, now they are 500,000. That is a very nice example. It did lack some service records and historical service records. Unique color, great mileage. But I think that these cars still have room, and I would love to see what you guys also think besides a manual Murcielago. Where do you see? I mean, I know if I had extra, if I had extra income, I would probably go for a manual Murcielago Roadster. I think the numbers are just so rare. We just sold our last car, one of 38, for the U.S. market. So I'm a huge fan of these. What do you love from this generation that's manual transmission that you just think is a no-brainer, still undervalued, still have ways to go? What I love about the Murcielago, to me, is this is usable. The maintenance costs are very low. It's chain driven. I could go on and on about that. So I'd love your guys' thoughts on that.
Well, you just threw a wet blanket on my point, my usability, but my car is the 550 Marquetta.
Yep.
I think, super undervalued car. It checks off all the boxes. Front engine V12, rear wheel drive, open top car, numbered less than 500 cars, and really has not picked the wave up yet. In my opinion, those cars should be between $800,000 and $1 million.
Yep.
I think we're 1 or 2 low mileage transactions away from that happening. And I think that's where those cars really need to be. Usability is kind of an arguable. I mean, the soft top that you put on the car is actually ugly, in my opinion. It'll just get you home at 30 miles an hour. But it's an open top, full-time car, so it's climate specific, obviously. But from an investment standpoint, I think super undervalued.
And I think, Stephen, you made a great point of just usability.
Serviceability, too.
And I think over the past few weeks, 2 550 Maranellos broke records probably for their spec and their mileage. The blue car, I think obviously it was a nice car, but I think that was a shocker. I think when Steven started with us, he was
Yeah, the 2020, you had the blue car.
yeah, we had a blue car. And I think, these cars are just so usable. They're great. They're fun to drive. They're fast. The AC is great. They're comfortable. I think
What's
they're
surprising
fantastic.
to me about that number, John, is there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it kind of breaks out of my theory a little bit. I'm really rigid about that.
It totally does.
Stability is 500, 800,
Yes.
1500 cars, and that's kind of
Yes.
it. And then 550s are like a mass-produced car.
Yes.
But, I guess the good examples, to your point, they're so good to drive.
Yes.
They drive like a modern GT car. I think you remember we purchased a car from Japan, and we were waiting for the title. I'm like, yeah, I'll use this thing. And I used it for a couple of weeks, and driving it back and forth home
Amazing.
to work, it's just an amazing car. Like I said, everything works. It just
Yes.
feels like you're driving a modern car.
Yep.
So I'm gonna.
What was the price range like before this door?
So
They were
it's-
like 40 grand at one point, weren't they?
no,
45?
not that low.
No,
I mean,
they
that
took
would
like 80,000.
Yeah.
For a car that needed service, you
Yeah.
can pick them up. That needed
So I think 80,000, 120,000. When we first started, some of the really good examples were like 150,000. I think we even sold like a 2,000 mile car for 200 or 250.
Yeah.
Which was shocking. People were like, "Oh my God, that's crazy." And now today, a 17,000 mile car is 260. But I agree with you on the Barchetta. I think it's the most undervalued Ferrari today. Manual transmission, it does everything right. I don't get it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
It'll
throw-
happen. I think what happens sometimes is cars get overlooked. We saw it with the Enzo, with all the Halo cars running up and running away, 288s and the 50s. There was a whole year where the Enzo just wasn't really moving. I'm like, what the hell's going on? And now all of a sudden, one or two transactions, and you can't touch an Enzo under $4 million,
Yep.
and they're quickly going to clip 5 years shortly. So
Yep.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Where do you think the cap is on this car? Being that it doesn't really check off any of the investment boxes, right? And I think we're, in my opinion, we're at a high value right now. Do you see a $400,000 number?
So what's interesting, when we posted the question on our Instagram,
Mhm.
and so many comments from you guys about 550. Everyone felt like they were still undervalued. Someone mentioned, I think they're still undervalued by 50 to 75,000. I look at the 550 Maranello almost exactly like a Daytona. Very similar production numbers. I mean, if you think, rational wise, of the time and the amount of consumers at the time, I think there's less than 1,000 US cars. So I think it will trend over time, similar to a Daytona. I think one day we could be looking at a 550 Maranello around $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. I don't see a 550 Maranello average color, average miles spec breaking $1 million one day. I just don't. Now I see a Barchetta one day. It's definitely $1 million, and I think one day it could be Daytona Spider prices.
And to your point, you see that in Daytonas. Daytonas really struggle to kind of break through that let's call it that resistance point of like 750 to 800.
Yes.
You catch a really good car. I think, there was a car that went for $1 million.
Yeah.
But I think that's more of an outlier car.
Yes,
And we've had
agreed.
experience with Daytona coupes. And 5 to 600, 5 to 650, sweet spot for the
Yeah.
cars. And it's been like that almost since the beginning for us.
For many
But,
years.
750 to 800, it's got to be really blue chip. But
Yes.
800 to me is that resistance point. And I think the 550, in my opinion, is like 350 is the
Yes.
resistance point for that car.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So I'm going to jump in on the 550s. There is actually a 550 variant that we haven't talked about, the WSR, the World Speed Record Edition car. And I think that checks a lot of boxes.
Oh, yeah.
Very limited. I think what was production on that?
33 cars.
Yeah, 33 cars for the world. Leather wrapped roll cage. You got the Fiorano handling pack, the carbon buckets. That is a forgotten car in the Ferrari world.
I agree. It's the cool. You had one.
So I'm embarrassed to say because I was called an expert. But I was offered the car a couple of years ago
Yeah.
in Europe, and I'm like, what is this thing? And I quick Google, and I'm like, became an expert. And I'm like, wow, this thing's really special. There's 33 cars. And we bought it quickly. I'm not thinking, all right, cool car. We brought it in, and it sold right away. And I'm like, you know what? That was a really cool special car. Let's go find another one. Yeah, let's go find another one. You just can't.
You just can't.
And I think you're right. I think
You're
if we're
right.
going to see $1 million
That's the one.
Yeah, that's the car.
550 WSR will be your million,
Yes.
million plus,
Yes, agreed.
along with the Barchettas. That's a great
Agreed.
point, Steve.
There's also
Really.
a couple of Barchettas that are trying to push that $1 million mark right now.
Yeah, there's
Unique colors.
unique
Barchettas
colors.
and
Again,
low
I think you make a
Fantastic.
great point about the 675 and the roof scoop. I think that today, and you look at spec is everything.
everything.
Yeah.
I think it's a game changer. We had the blue 550 Barchetta, and it
But a line of
people-
guys.
yeah, people
line of
were
guys.
fighting over it.
Yeah.
So I think spec is everything today. Getting to a dull spec, but my favorite spec, the black Veyron that traded this weekend. As you guys know, I've been a massive fan of Veyron. I think it's super undervalued, even though the service costs are not so fun.
No.
Not so fun. What do you guys think of the Bugatti brand? Steven, I'm going to ask you first. What do you think of the Bugatti brand? What is your favorite car as a supercar from the Bugatti brand, and where do you see the brand going as a whole?
As a young kid in the growing up in the supercar, hypercar transitional era, to see the Veyrons bringing the numbers that they were truly engineering marvels. And just watching the documentaries with Top Gears and all that as well, they were really ahead of their time, and everybody knows that. To me, the ED110 and especially the SS variations are very underrated. Having thankfully spending some time here and had some seat time with the SS, you can see how radical that car is and how usable it is. But it's really the next generation's car where it's forgotten about, but there's still an opportunity for growth, I think, in the market when people understand what the people that were involved, the engineering and the great lengths that they went to even create it. Like there was very little shared. Like a lot of these boutique hypercars, you'll see, oh, this turn signal came from these guys or this came from there. They were making their own headlights and turn signals, and just on a limited production car like that, it was groundbreaking. And there's never been another car with that driveline. Quad turbo V12 with a manual transmission, revs to 8,500 RPMs. It's next level car. It really is. Carbon chassis and 4-wheel drive.
Yep.
And 603 horsepower.
Now he's making me regret the recent sale of our SS. No, I agree. I agree. There's no argument there.
Yeah, so look, I think the Veyron was groundbreaking, like to Steven's point. When it came out, it just blew everyone's mind, right? I think Bugatti's issue today is they seem to milk a lot out of the same platform. That's just my opinion. So you get the one car, which is groundbreaking, and then the Chiron came out, which is beautiful, and then you have 25 sub models underneath it, which I think in a lot of ways kind of hurts the brand a little bit. That's my opinion. The EB series cars, I think, probably still the most undervalued of all of them, because I was fortunate enough to chase a car, as you know, a few years ago, which was a lost car. It's a great story. When the company was padlocked, this car was sitting off site. It was 98% complete, and then it had to be hidden away from bankruptcy for years and years, and then it was finished and it was sold, and I started to do some research, and the passion that went into resurrecting Bugatti is an amazing story. Roman Artioli's story was pure passion.
Yep.
As you know, he brought Ferruccio Lamborghini in, and they poached a bunch of engineers from Lamborghini and Ferrari.
I mean, the best engineers.
It's a soap opera, it's a drama, but it was truly a project of passion, and you could see it in the cars, and it really resurrected a brand that had been dead for 50, 60 years. And it took a while for, I think, the market to recognize, hey, wait a minute, that's actually Bugatti. That's when Bugatti was reborn. And even though the Veyron project didn't acknowledge the Artioli project,
not at all.
But now there's this cohesion in the market for that. So, and I believe that the EBs have not yet been realized as far as from the investment aspect.
Yep.
I think those cars an SS should be $5 million. Yep. I think a GT should be $3 million plus. And they will get there eventually, because people will begin to understand historical significance. And as we said, there's just not a lot of those cars.
Yeah. I think the other thing to me that's so, I think, almost shocking and also exciting for the brand is the new car that they're coming out with, which is supposed to be a 12-cylinder with like 11,000 RPM, some crazy numbers, and the MSRP is $5 million.
Yeah.
So imagine you have this new car, they're probably going to build 500 or whatever it is, 400 cars, and that's $5 million. So how are the historic cars especially if they run, because like you said, it definitely changed the landscape, the supercar landscape.
Yeah.
I think another thing we should talk about that was funny to me and cool for me to see, almost I was celebrating some of the guys in Europe, was this massive sort of shift in Villa d'As this year and the Villa d'As Concours, where, you know, we're talking about the second largest Concours d'Elegance in the world, probably, besides Pebble Beach, or most important. And in their major, in a couple of their major classes, you have Countach's, a Diablo GT. You know, so I think that's also exciting to see Lamborghini shift into this upper echelon of the collector car world.
Well, look, we saw it at Pebble Beach, right?
Yes.
Pebble Beach opened up a class with the Lamborghinis, and let's call it a modern era Lamborghini.
Yes.
Was awarded.
Yes.
And I just think that speaks more to generation, right?
Yes.
The kids of yesterday that had posters on the wall are now attending shows. They're spending the money.
Yes.
And that's the passion. That's what they wanted. So it's good. It means that the enthusiasm transcends, right? Like, the shows aren't going to die and go away. It just, you might not see as many guys gathering around a pre-war Delahaye or something. You know, they'll gather around the Diablo
100%.
GT.
Yeah. 100%.
So yeah, I think it's good, and I think it shows health and enthusiasm overall for the market. I think it's always going to shift upwards that way. So yeah, it's great to see.
Okay, so as we start to wrap this up, I'd love some input here, and this is an open conversation. So feel free to put your comments into the video. We'll start with Herschel first. What are your top 3 cars that you think are the most undervalued or most exciting for the future? Under 500,000, and then I would say then any amount, top 3 cars undervalued.
You want 3 of each, or just
3 of each?
Oh, 3 of each. I wasn't ready for that. So under 500,000, as we said, 550 Barchetta.
Yep.
As a average under. This is something we haven't talked about, but I think any limited run GT2 Porsche, modern era, something from the 2000s, I think super undervalued car.
Yep.
And number 3, let's see, under 500, I think 355 Challenge.
Okay.
I really like that car. I think if you look at the whole race segment, 48s and anything that's had any type of historical racing, those cars are already on the move, and 355s are starting to.
Yep.
So I think long way to go for those cars.
Very cool.
And then 3 anything. EB110, as we talked about.
Cool.
I think EB110 is also super undervalued. Porsche 918. I think Porsche 918, and let's share it with that and the Carrera GT. 2 very iconic cars for that brand, very limited run, that I think are beginning to get the recognition and movement in the market. So, is that 3 or 2?
Those 2.
That was 2, because I said they will split. It's like an honorable co-mention for the 2 of them. I think, again, I'm going to go back to a race car, and I think it would be any of the kind of modern era Ferrari race cars.
Okay.
So GTE, 48, cool. Stuff like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, so I'll take next. I'll say, I still think 996 Turbo, like a very cool spec. I still think they're undervalued.
Yep.
I think it's an incredible car, a really, really good car. I'm gonna put 2 cars in here. I'm gonna say 550 Barchetta as well. I don't want to agree with you on that, but I will.
It hurts him.
But I think I'm gonna mix 2 together, and it's R8 manual and Gallardo manual.
Cool car, yeah.
I just think, 430 manual prices are hot. They're consistently selling. Gallardo manual prices have seemed dead, with the exception of a few special variants. And R8 manual, it's basically the same car, but I think they're fantastic. I even love the V8. I think it's a lot of car for the money.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the flip side, over 500,000, I think any of the special Diablos, Diablo GT, SE30, you guys know Lamborghini has my heart.
Yeah.
And I think especially with the Miura SV price, I think the next Lamborghini to jump is the LP400S low body. I don't think enough people realize how special that car is, just as art. Forget the fact that it might not be the easiest car to get into because the roof is actually lower. It's super low to the ground. But that car is the first Countach with flares, wide wheels. There's only 155 that were produced. There's maybe 120 left. That car will be the next Miura SV in my eyes.
So if I go, I'm going to interrupt you.
Yes.
So I'm going to take us off track.
Yes.
But we glossed over a really important car, and we're in the midst of experiencing this run-up, the Diablo GT.
Oh.
Which is, in my opinion, I think this is something we always agree on, the
Yes.
most important Diablo.
Yeah.
It's numbered to 80. It's just a fantastic car.
And it's usable. I
Yeah.
mean, listen, I personally own an SE30. I love the SE30. I think it's the greatest. I can't decide if I like a GT more than an SE30, but the SE30, it feels like, more of an F40. It's more crude, it's lower. The windows don't go down. It's more raw, where the GT is usable.
and
The
they're,
windows go
and they're
down, the
really on
AC
the move,
works.
and I think
Yes.
we have a long way to go. with those
Yes,
cars.
I agree.
Yeah. Sorry, I
agree.
didn't mean to interrupt you. But
No, anytime. You
Yeah,
can
yeah.
interrupt me anytime. And I actually think, I think very, very special F40s. So like a plexiglass window F40.
Mhm.
I think anything with a cool history. Every time we get an F40, it just sells.
Yeah.
There's always a buyer for an F40. I think it's one of the most iconic. But there's a lot of cars. I mean, there's 1,321 cars or 1,330 cars.
1,300 cars, but then when you get into the sub variants,
Yes.
obviously your Lexan cars were
Yes.
55.
Yes.
And then there were some extras made a little later on. We
Yes.
experienced that.
About 100 cars total.
Yeah, and obviously the F40 LM and the GTE variants
Yes.
are starting to get a lot of attention. But yeah, I think F40s kind of broke the rule a little bit. There's over 1,000 cars, but
Yes.
I think it shows you
But
the
I think a
passion of that
special
car.
car, I don't see a plexiglass window selling that much more today than a normal car. So I think those special variants will break the bank. Steven,
So our original question was under 200,000.
I said, we can say under 500.
3 under 5.
3 under 5.
Under 2's tough.
Gallardo Superleggera. When was the last time we had a nice Superleggera?
And it's one of my favorite cars to drive. It's
And
fantastic.
And they're half the price of a 430 Scuderia.
Yes,
Undervalued completely. The
Agreed.
first generation 5.0.
agreed.
Then we got in the 1,000-mile 50th Anniversario. It's an incredibly undervalued car. Rear-wheel drive, carbon buckets, extended Alcantara, OZ Superleggera wheels. Great driving car with the updated 5.2.
Yep,
So you can get both kind of flavors.
yep.
So one of the guys from our team, Gabe, described it as a mini Carrera GT.
Yeah, it is.
So
It is.
a forgotten Lamborghini variant
I agree.
and an underrated variant. So we'll see what happens when those cars come 25 years old.
Hmm.
You can actually pull some of those out. You could get the carbon seats.
Yes.
So that'll be interesting to see if there will be a discrepancy there. I'm going to go with WSR 550 for undervalued.
Love it. And over 500,000, what are your top 3? You can't say AMG Hammer, by the way.
No.
You can't say AMG Hammer.
Okay, our Murcielago 40th. I think there's limited cars. They're numbered.
Yep.
And the story behind them, where it was dealers couldn't get rid of them. So they kind of lingered, and they were kind of this weird, kind of misunderstood car where, oh, it's not really that special. It doesn't matter. It is numbered, and it was a one-off piece. So I think 40th Anniversario Murcielagos are very underrated cars. Those are very strong about. I love the design of the early Mercies. They took a lot of design features from the Miura SV with the scoops, the rear taillights from the SV, the wheels,
Love it.
the rear slats. And until we had them an orange Mercy next to an orange SV, I could point to them and say, look how much DNA is shared. This is truly the last of the line from the greatest to continue that lineage. And people like history. So I'm doubling down on the 40ths. I
Love
think
it.
those are $1 million cars all day long.
Love it.
What else? I need 2 more, right?
Yep, 2 more.
It's not easy,
I think
right?
the special variations, like we're seeing with the Callaways,
Mhm.
I think the specialty stuff with the unique history.
Yep.
Um,
I agree. People want special. They want wacky,
Right.
weird things that they
Gemalas,
remembered as a kid.
roofs,
Yes,
anything in that kind of range.
I agree.
The W09 cars, you got to prove it. If you can prove it, you'll be rewarded by the market.
Yep.
I think it's a big thing. Kind of the later roof cars too. I mean,
Yep.
obviously the air-cooled stuff had the run, but people like the tuner stuff. People like the unique stuff. So I'm going to say roofs.
Cool.
And one more. Lexus LFAs.
Okay.
Yeah, Lexus
Yeah.
LFAs.
And you know what? I have to admit, I haven't always been a fan
Yeah.
of the LFA. We'll slightly disagree but agree. And they've done. Listen, they have done well over the last few years.
It's funny, there might be a disagreement on this panel, that might be an overvalue. But we'll see.
But I love the from your generation as well. Those are very the next generation of collecting cars and being passionate about cars. I think listen, and you guys cut me off or chime in. I think this past week it shows like a generational shift in the market, and you see really special cars, 16M, 550, great color, Veyron start to creep away, and even in a weird market overall, these cars are doing really, really well. So I think we're seeing a generational shift, and the cream is rising to the top.
Yeah.
Really great stuff. And I love your point that it's like smart money today. It's people that are very passionate. They know exactly what they want. They're discerning numbered cars, great colors, great specs.
Yeah, I get a
that's
lot
my
of
take.
questions, I have a lot of friends that have, dealerships, they sell 40H and G-Wagons, and, to be honest, not to panic anyone watching about the market, but they're starting to say, hey, things have slowed down. How are you doing? What are you guys feeling? I'm like, well, I'm not saying we're doing bad or good. I don't want to make them feel bad, but we're chasing the best.
Yep.
And when you chase the best, the market's always there, right?
Yep.
So I think to your point, the investment side of the market, the enthusiast side of the market, the guys that really want to add to their collections or look for the best, that market's still very healthy. And as you can see, there's still incremental increase in values almost at every watermark, every auction point. Versus, okay, we were going through these exponential rises in the last few years, again, driven by a lot of factors. But still, what I see in this market is an increased focus on blue chip, on the better stuff. Yeah.
And I think that's where passion comes in at the end of the day. It is pure passion.
I think we forgot a car that you and I both agree on. COK DTM.
Oh,
Coupe and cab variations.
totally.
Just under 100 cars made.
Yep.
And how much they sharpened that car up. The people that were involved. And then you look at now Mercedes is getting big collectors. You see the guys are collecting the Black Series cars. But they forget on the cars that started that. So.
Yeah,
I
that's a
agree.
great point.
DTM is
DTM.
fantastic car built by our friends at HWA. Basically a race car for the street. But I think there's a lot of, we didn't bring up Koenigsegg's. I love the CCX and CCXR cars. I think they're great. There's so many great cars. So I think this was awesome. Thank you guys. We definitely, listen, we're doing this for all of the passionate enthusiasts and collectors out there. I think one of the things that Steven brought up was usability. And again, it's because we're starting to see more US buyers today drive cars. And that's awesome. And we love to see that. And I think it's sort of it's part of where this market's going. It's a younger generation. I think we all agree with that. And people that want to use cars. So we want your comments. We want your input. Thank you guys so much for watching. Tell us if you like this format. For us, this is always fun. I think we're definitely going to bring on some other opinions and outside opinions as well. And maybe even we do a live stream with a ton of questions as well. So let us know what you guys think. Thank you guys again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was a blast, and thank you guys as well.